Argento meets Faust. That may be the way to describe this 2014 movie, Starry Eyes. And this is a somewhat kind of art house horror movie. And it's about the film industry, kind of. And people's ambition and how it can corrupt them. So this tells the story of this young woman who is an aspiring actress. To support herself, she's working in a kind of Hooters style restaurant, and she's living in a kind of an apartment building with a group of friends, all of whom are trying to get into the film industry. One day she goes for an audition, and she has a somewhat of a vulnerable disposition, you might say. She has a little bit of a tick, you might call it. Anyway, the producers are somewhat intrigued by this and kind of invite her back, and she meets the kind of like the top dog, so to speak, and he ultimately kind of is interested in her in more ways than one. But this cabal of film producers may well be involved in a kind of occult dark sect, so they ultimately exert some influence over our main character, who initially seemingly is being coerced or maybe manipulated, but sort of ends up becoming more in control of what she kind of is going to be doing about this situation, shall we say. What will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about what I think works in this movie's favour. So the character of Sarah is the kind of the focal point there, and the actress who plays her, I think, does an outstanding job, really going through a gambit of highs and lows, different emotions, different kind of styles of the character. So this character does go through a variety of different type of scenes and stuff, and I do think the actress here does a fantastic job. So the acting, certainly from our main character, I think is very impressive. The second thing is, I would suggest, is when we do have our VFX scenes, and the last third of this movie is the more overt horror elements to it, and there are some very violent and gory scenes in this movie. The movie is quite slow paced up until that point, so when these situations happen, when we have these kind of more violent scenes, they sort of come out of left field somewhat, and thus feel shocking, because we really haven't been prepped for that, to be honest. And they're done in a very graphic and realistic manner, with realistic wounds and things, and realistic portrays of people being injured and killed. So I thought that was all deliberately quite shocking and kind of pulled off kind of quite well. Now the interesting thing here is that the theme of this movie obviously is, what will you do for your ambition? Where is it going to take you? And will you make decisions that are harmful ultimately to you? And obviously in Hollywood and the film industry, it's known for people doing things maybe that they don't want to do, certainly initially, to kind of get roles and stuff, and how some people may take advantage of other people and such, but that you can apply that to just life in general to a certain degree. But I feel it's a little microcosm in sort of the Hollywood sort of scene, so to speak. So I think it's probably the perfect set up for this kind of style of movie. And the actual occult side of stuff is left somewhat vague about what's kind of going on, which gives it an air of sort of mystery, because you don't quite know who's involved maybe, and what they're actually doing. You get enough, I think, to get the gist of where the story is going, and the underlying tones of this film, and the themes that it's trying to kind of put across. But it's somewhat subtle in regards to the information that it's kind of doling out to you as an audience. This is not a film, I would say, if you want things massively spelled out for you. So it has an interesting kind of premise, it's has artistic flourishes. I don't know if I would call it a full-on art house film, but there is certainly elements of that. So, you know, that's the kind of the comparison I would say here. You almost feel like it's somewhat influenced by the likes of Argento, and kind of maybe like Hitchcock to a certain degree. But yeah, there is some artistic flourishes, and it kind of does go into somewhat of a surreal element here and there. So what doesn't work in this movie, I have to be honest with you, I feel the plot is rather slight. This is not, although it's an interesting synopsis for a film, I don't know if the whole narrative is really that compelling, I have to be honest. Now, I had a quick look at a couple of reviews, and I have to say I think a lot of people like this movie better than I did. I gotta say, I think the movie was a little static in its forward momentum. It was just a little bit slow and a little bit meandering in its plot. And then we have certainly in the first two acts, but there's an interesting idea there. It's just there's not a lot of forward momentum. And then you know there's certain scenes where you felt like it wasn't really necessary. Like, for example, there's just scenes here to kind of show you the descent that this Sarah character is kind of going through. Like, she's working at this chicken restaurant, then she ends up leaving, but then she comes back again, and then she gets fired again. Did she really need to come back again? Not really. Didn't really serve any purpose of the story outside of, you know, it shows her kind of losing it a little bit. But certain side characters I felt were almost superficial to a certain degree. But yeah, it meanders on a little bit, I think, and then we have this sudden left turn where it gets violent, and I feel it. I have to be honest with you, I feel it didn't really. It sort of came out of nowhere. We understand that there is this cult or this sect that are trying to indoctrinate her into this kind of cult. But then these kind of violent stuff happens, and I thought, this just feels like it came out of nowhere and just took a left turn, and the character of Sarah just sort of changed on a dime to a certain degree. And it didn't really seem earned or kind of like a natural progression. It just kind of like, all of a sudden, you know, she's kind of losing her composure somewhat, and her body's fatiguing, and then she suddenly turns murderous and psychopathic. Out of nowhere. So I don't know if I really kind of bought that, if I'm honest. I think the vagueness of what's kind of going on, certainly in regards to this cult, I feel some people may see this as being a little bit unsatisfying. I have to say, I think it bordered on a little bit silly at times. So, you know, there's just not much to it, I didn't think. It hasn't, like I say, I think this would have been an interesting part of a film, but I think it needed to have a little bit more to it. So for me, it's a well put together film. I just don't think it's that interesting. And some of the kind of the things that happen of it seem out of turn, superficial, not necessary, and meanders a lot. Do I think this is a bad film? I don't think it's a bad film, but I don't think it's a particularly great film either. So that means it's going to be a bang on 5 out of 10. An average film, if you ask me.